Oh, hi, friends. Welcome to the Andrea Lake 101 podcast, The Making of a Billionaire. We are starting a new Friday tradition. Sometimes Fridays will be Fireside Fridays, and sometimes they will be story time. This week, we are doing story time, Secrets of the Apprentice. Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. I was a contestant on The Apprentice back in the day on season 5. I was a reality TV star before there was such a thing as a reality TV star. And when, quite frankly, you would immediately be like very famous, like pretty high level famous if you were on a network reality TV show, because there were like 3 of them: Amazing Race, Survivor, and Apprentice. That was it. Then other networks came out with such good content, like all of the renovation shows, home renovation shows, and all of the cooking shows, like all of the Yes, and The Bachelorette and all of those shows. However, back in the day, there was just not a lot of content around reality TV. So if you're one of the 16 or 18 contestants on your season, like immediately people knew who you were. Immediately. It would be covered in magazines, like in Us Magazine, People Magazine, all these different magazines where I was actually immediately covered and featured. And because I was the contestant on my season of The Apprentice who actually was an entrepreneur who did have real companies, because they would take people, I misunderstood. I didn't know what I was getting into. They would take people from all different areas. It wasn't just entrepreneurs. And because I didn't own a television, when I turned 19 years old, I gave away all my TVs. And I have not owned a television for my entire adult life. I still do not own a television. However, now, of course I do, because every computer I have is a television effectively. And I started watching television in the lockdowns in 2020. I started here and there seeing TV like slightly before that when I started the Winston House. But I digress. We are going to go into a series now that details my time on The Apprentice. It's going to be a 2-parter, at least. It's going to be a series. It's at least going to be 3 or 4 episodes. They will be on Fridays, maybe every other Friday, because we're still doing Fireside Fridays. My business partner, Dan Caldwell, is going to come interview me. My good friend and entrepreneur, Emma Barrera, and Nick Pigeon are going to come interview me, and a whole bunch of other people, and Brianna is going to be on one. So that's going to be fun too. But for right now, we're going to dive into The Apprentice. Now, at first, I intended just to do the whole Apprentice in one episode. However, it's a whole ass story, and I must spill some tea. And my NDA is up on that show. It's been up for decades. And Romain Satuti just wrote a best-selling book called Apprentice in Wonderland. If you just clicked into here because you were like, what's going on with this reality TV star thing, there's a whole ass podcast that you might want to listen to first, because it's kind of a circular story about how I got to this point. But if you just move on from here, I was recruited heavily onto being on The Apprentice. Why? Because I started my first company when I was 18 years old. I was 32 when I was on The Apprentice. I had already started 7 or 8 companies, multiple $1-million businesses. I was selling millions and millions of dollars worth of merchandise to chain stores across the US, like all kinds of cool t-shirts. I owned stickerjunkie.com, which was at the time doing, a couple $1 million a year in revenue. I owned many companies at the time, all of which were doing well. And so when I first heard about the show, it was the first season, because one of my mentors is a psychologist who did all of the casting for Survivor and Apprentice and Amazing Race in the early days of reality TV show and many other shows. Dr. Richard Levac, shout out Richard, a very big influence on my life and one of my personal mentors. So this story requires a little backstory even to get into The Apprentice, which made me be like, oh yeah, so this is just going to be part of the whole circle of things. So really, if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, you might want to catch up to where we are right now. So today is Friday, September 27th, 2024. With any luck at all and all of the brave efforts from Chloe at Right Hand Glam, and also big shout out to Emma, we will have this episode up on Friday, September 20th. I'm drinking wine. while we film this episode, which means I will spill a little more tea. So here's what keeps happening. I keep shooting episodes when I'm having a glass of wine, and then I delete the episode really fast because I said too much. That can happen when you're in a situation where one of your biggest competitors, who's a much bigger company than you, keeps talking a lot. I got to be careful what I say. However, with something like The Apprentice, I don't have any contracts with those dudes anymore. I'm just going to say what happened. I might make up some pseudonyms for some people who maybe might not want their names used, but other than that, this is the whole ass story. So if you do not remember, I'm going to get you up to speed with how I got in this book. I get asked all the time to do interviews for something in entrepreneurship, and I say no 98% of the time. But something about the way that Ramin sent me this request, he said, hey, I'm writing this book. I'm like the co-editor of Variety, and he's a very well-known writer. And I'm working with Donald Trump on this book about The Apprentice and sort of answering the question, did The Apprentice help him to get elected into office? I would say yes. Fucking obviously. Give me a break. He's a celebrity because of that show. And so he himself, on the back of the book, Donald Trump himself says, so do you think I would have been president without The Apprentice? I say yes, but some people say no. Many smart people say no. I'm one of those many smart people who say no, who say, look, that book helped and you were president. Or sorry, that television show helped and you were president. So, but that helped because you're a fucking celebrity, a billionaire celebrity. Everybody wants to watch that. The name of the show is The Making of a Billionaire. It's compelling content. So how the fuck did I get on that show? Why did I do that show? How did that dude become my mentor? Yeah, it requires a backstory even to start the Apprentice story. And to sit here, right here, and look into a camera and talk for an hour or an hour and a half, it's hard. So sometimes I have wine when I do it, and then I'm like, shit, I said too much, and then I delete it. I know I'm repeating myself because sometimes when I drink wine, I repeat myself. But then a few people who are on the distribution list, they have been seeing it. And they're like, stop deleting that. It's so much more funny when you're a little bit buzzed. So originally I was going to call Friday segments Wine, Weed, and Winning. So I might have smoked a little weed at my beautiful, beautiful, oh my God, I'm going to update you guys on the next episode of where we are with scaling, but there's a whole crazy way that I got to come to Sedona for a week before Brianna and I move into our beautiful new apartment in San Diego and just relax. And it's Friday and it's too early for me to have opened a bottle of wine, but I'm like, I'm doing it for the people. For the first 1,000 fanatic followers who talk about this podcast and recommend it to their friends the way that I talk about Sakara and recommend it to my friends. We are going to dive deep. We are not just going to do one show about The Apprentice. I am going to tell you the whole ass fucking story. And it is going to be, I don't even know, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 episodes, because I'm going to tell you the whole ass thing. And it's a lot. There's some things that happen on there that are not very flattering looking to me, but you can go watch the show and you'll know immediately what those are. So how did I get here? There's just a little bit of like way back story that will be helpful to understand what happened. So I lost my dad when I was like 22. And that was all of the hard that you would imagine that it would have been. But I was really lucky because he had cancer and it wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't sudden. We knew it was coming. So we had 9 months where he could do all the things that he wanted to do that he did not have a chance to do when he was alive. He got to do those things. That is such a rare gift. And the doctors had given him 3 months to live and he lived for 9. And I got to have every conversation with my dad that I would have wanted to have before he died. And I hope that everyone gets the opportunity to say all of the things that they would want to say to a loved one before that person passed. And it shifted the way that I lived my life now to where I try my best. It doesn't always work because I am a fallible human being, to tell people just how much I love them, how much I appreciate them, how much I value them. And to me, that is anyone in my life, anyone in my ecosystem. I want every person that is in my companies to know how much I love them and value them and appreciate them. I so appreciate them. Even people that get caught off my team, I adore them. I adore them. And the people that are on my team, I have the tightest, most secure, good feeling team. I can't tell you how much I appreciate every single one of them. And sometimes I fall short of letting them know how much I appreciate them. But I sort of started to live my whole life with this ethos of really telling people how much I value them, how much I appreciate them, how much I adore them. But I also wasn't really willing to have hard conversations. When I was younger, I was very guarded because I was very, very, very extremely bullied when I was a kid. Like when I was in junior high school, so many incidents happened, but this one will sort of get you up to speed with the level of the bullying. This kid in my science class, while we were dissecting frogs, like, why is that a thing? Are they still, they cannot possibly still be doing that. But if they're still doing that with formaldehyde frogs, the 80s was wild. That should never have been a thing. It can't possibly still be a thing. But if it is still a thing, let's do not that. It's wild. So one of the guys who I actually would have considered like more on the friend side of the column, not friend, but like not mean. He was not one of my bullies. He actually really wasn't. And he really felt bad for what he did next. But I was so bullied that there almost was like clout to bullying me. It was the most ridiculous thing. Maybe one day I will tell you that story of how I started to get bullied. It was like a John Hughes movie from the 80s. It was so dumb. And it was immediate, and I lost my whole friend group overnight. I was in the popular crowd. I didn't know I was in the popular crowd. Something happened. Well, I'll just tell you the story. Some guy asked me on a date, and he was 5'3", and I was 5'8". I was taller than everyone, and he was like a star athlete in my school, like a star athlete. When he was 12 years old, he was in Sports Illustrated, and their little teeny tiny column at the back of Sports Illustrated, star athlete. And I was so self-conscious of my height because I grew so fast, and he like invited me to a school dance, but he didn't ask me. If he would have asked me, I would have said yes, obviously, because I didn't know how to say no. When I was a kid, I didn't know how to say, no, I do not want to date you right now because I'm really self-conscious about my height and you're a head shorter than me, so everybody's going to be looking at us and I'm going to feel very self-conscious about that. I was like a 14-year-old kid, come on. And so he asked his friend to ask me. And I said, and he was like, Andrea, you should do this. This will be really good for you. It's going to be really bad if you say no to him because he was like the most popular kid in school. And I looked at his friend who asked me on his behalf and I like begging in my eyes. And I was like, I can't. I'm so tall and he is so short. And we were not educated about short kings and how magical and amazing and how all of the things. Do you know what I mean? I just would have been very self-conscious, so I said no. So that day at lunch, I was not allowed to sit with a group of people that I normally sat with at lunch. And that's how I found out that I had previously been in the popular crowd. And I didn't dislike that guy. It was my own insecurities. But I didn't know that dude. And that dude didn't ask me. He asked his friend to ask me on his behalf. So I get completely excommunicated from the popular group. And then I just am super isolated. And my parents had just gotten divorced. Spoiler alert. They end up getting remarried. They were only divorced for 2 years, but they're also really busy. And so we had moved to different areas of town. And my mom was like working full time and going back to school full time. And I was a latchkey kid that was babysitting for like 40 to 60 hours a week in the summer and maybe 20 or 30 hours a week in the school year, just because like that's what you did when you were 12 or 13 years old in the 80s. If you wanted to, and I wanted to make the money, and I didn't have any friends to go hang out with anyways. It was such a sad existence. So sometimes when I say, no, I read thousands of books, what I actually mean is I read thousands of books, thousands of them, thousands. The level of isolation that I lived through for those 2 years in junior high school was like insane, like crazy. And that it wasn't torture. It wasn't like what we put people through in the United States in solitary confinement, which needs to all of the be corrected. But it was an equivalent, like all of a sudden you have no one. Mom and dad are really busy. I'm not sharing with them that I'm getting bullied, because it was like a point of embarrassment. Like, you know, the bullying clearly was my fault. That was a really common belief in the 80s, and whatever. So I didn't tell them that this was going on because I just didn't, and they were busy and I didn't want to burden them, and they had their own lives, and I was inconveniently smart for how old I was. And I was like, I do not, it's going to make it worse. They're going to try and intercede, and I don't want any of that. And it's not just the kids, it's the teachers too. Several of my teachers were also bullying me, which is awesome. If you are an adult and you're bullying like a 12 or 13-year-old girl, what the actual fuck is wrong with you? So the one incident is I was in a class with this guy that we used to call him Mr. McPervert. And he had all the pretty girls sitting in the front row and the cheerleaders' outfits. And I was not one of those girls. I was in the back of the class with my very baggy clothes, like just doing whatever I was doing. And we'll just call him Sean. We're just going to make up a name. It'll be easier. Sean comes up to me, and I had considered him my friend. And then there was another kid in the class, we'll call him Mike. He came up to me, and I had considered him my friend also. And I was wearing a turtleneck top and a denim dress with a big zipper down the front. And this is going to get to all of the things and why everything happened the way that it did. I know we're going to talk about The Apprentice. I know we are. But it's important to understand why some people shut down in certain situations and some people don't. And so I was in class, and this kid, Mike, who was like the class clown, who's a really funny kid. And he and I liked each other. We would joke around. He was not one of the people that was bullying me. But I had this denim dress that was really popular at the time that zipped all the way up the front. Well, it also had a turtleneck on underneath this denim dress. So it looked as if I had a second dress under the dress, but I did not. So he unzipped my whole dress in front of the whole class. And I was just like standing there in my underwear and a turtleneck. And he accidentally like took the whole zipper off. So it was like, there was no way to hide it quickly. And I was like immediately burst into tears and was like I didn't actually cry yet. I was just like horrified, and I was trying to get the zipper relatched. And I saw the look of horror on his face. He did not mean to do that. I know that he didn't. He's just a fucking dumbass little kid. And then I was so embarrassed, and I zipped my dress back up really as quickly as I could. This was on frog dissection day. So then I put on, and the kids were laughing because kids are assholes. And then I put on this big baggy sweater that I have with me, and I was like trying to fight back tears because never let him see you sweat. Never let him see you upset. But I couldn't believe it because I really did consider that kid my friend. And then I'm like at some table dissecting a frog, which is, why do we make people do that? That really was a thing in the 80s. I can't. And this other kid who was dating the only friend I had came up to me and pulled my big sweater back, and also had pulled back like the turtleneck and the shirt, and threw frog guts in to my clothes. And because I had this tight turtleneck, it somehow got in the back of the turtleneck and like pushed them against my body, this formaldehyde, disgusting frog's guts. So I screamed, as one does, in the middle of the classroom, and the teacher screamed at me, "How dare you, you're such a spoiled little brat. Go to the principal's office right now." And I was like, but there's nothing. And he just kept yelling at me. He was infuriated, and he called me a spoiled little brat and told me to sit back down in front of the whole class. And like, I ran out to go to the bathroom, and somehow I explained to someone like what was happening, and they helped me because I couldn't even get like out of this baggy sweater, and then this dress, and then the turtleneck. And so I had to like basically get naked just to get the frog guts off of me in the bathroom at the school. I'm gonna cry right now. Like, are you kidding me? That was just normal. That was just one of the very fucking many things that happened. And then I went to the principal's office, but I had stopped in the bathroom for this 5 or 10 minutes to get the frog guts off of my back. And by the time I got there, the other people involved had told a different story, that I was this very attention seeking and I was lying and and whatever. And I have always been a potty mouth. So I think he was like, fuck, what the fuck, or shit, or I did swear, which shocker. And I got in trouble. I got sent home. I got suspended. I got detention because I sweared in class. And when I said that frog guts had gotten thrown down my shirt, which I actually did say, which I almost would never say, because I actually was sort of friendly with those kids. I didn't want to get them in trouble. And not only that, I know how much worse that things would be for me if I did get them in trouble, which was true. And then my dad came and picked me up. He had to leave work and come pick me up from school. And I didn't want to tell him I was bullied. So it just looked like I was cussing in class. And that was like a daily, regular, not unusual, maybe something like that once a week experience for me for 2 years. And that fucks the kid up. It really does. And like my parents totally would have helped me if I told them. My mom, this is for sure on the podcast, the first time she's ever going to hear this story. They were busy. My mom was like getting a degree and working full time and really present on the weekends and all of the things. And if I would have told her, she would have done something and it would have caused more problems for me as a kid, was my logic. So I was just like trying to make it through junior high. And I read thousands to a very remote location, and I didn't have a car. And we moved into this house when I was like 13 and a half or 14, because remember, my parents got remarried. And it was so beautiful. It was in a beautiful area with beautiful hills outside of San Diego. It was just so gorgeous, but it was so remote. There was no community there yet. Like it was an expansion on the outskirts, and they were rebuilding this house and putting a pool in and flipping it. Well, I didn't have a car. And my parents, I feel like, were sort of like, well, it's fine because David has a car, my brother. And David did drive me to and from school, but David had a whole life. He was like varsity football, varsity basketball, and nobody wants their little sister tagging along, listening to all of his NWA and all of his favorite rap music on the way to school. So he just only would drive me to and from school. There was no, he had his own life. And so then I was isolated again for 2 more years because none of my friends had cars. So from like 13 and a half to 16, I just was stuck in this beautiful house in the middle of nowhere for a kid without a car. If you have a car, it's like 10 minutes from anything. But if you have feet, it was like 2.5 miles to like 7-Eleven. And that was the only thing on that corner, was a 7-Eleven and like a frozen yogurt shop. And it was like 4 miles to the next thing. It wasn't an amount that maybe more, maybe like 6 at the time. Like it wasn't a thing where you could kind of go walk. And I would do it sometimes. It was like a whole day to get to wherever you were going and like have a meal and do whatever you were going to do and then walk home. So I just stayed at home and read all of the time on this beautiful house and this beautiful land. Like it wasn't bad, but it was really, 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 really isolating. And I would read books on psychology. Like I don't understand why I'm not fitting in. I would read books on negotiation, on anything, any type of business thing, and a lot of biographies. I wanted to understand how people who really had lived a great life, I wanted to understand how they think. So I was just a weird kid. I was super smart and really socially isolated for a lot of my developmental years. So I just like build strategies in, but then I also was like really empathetic and really kind to everyone because I understood what it felt like to be bullied and to feel different and to feel really unattractive. Like sometimes people, you know, you hear about somebody that's like a supermodel and they're like, no, I was so awkward when I was 14. And I'm I'm 5'10". So when you grow that fast, like your nose grows really fast and your ears grow really fast and everything else has to sort of grow into your body. And it's painful when you grow that fast. And that's why a lot of very beautiful women just do not realize that they're beautiful because they legitimately did have a really awkward phase. And I'll dig up some 14-year-old Andrea pictures and you'll be like, oh yeah, I see now. Okay, yeah, that really actually was a super fucking awkward phase. And anyway, that informed a lot of my future decisions. That the sort of tendency towards isolation, if I feel things are really out of sorts, it just feels safer for me to be by myself. And then there's just like, I feel like a certain level of defensiveness and like sort of stoicness that someone learns when they're in a situation like that. And I learned all of those things. I am way off on the weeds. I haven't even started talking about The Apprentice yet, but I will. So fast forward, I'm 23 and I'm just about to start my own companies, or 22, and I lose my dad, and it is hard. And I take the lesson from this of like, wow, life is so short. My dad was 51 when he died. I'm 50. That's when he found out he had cancer, was at my age and only lived for 9 more months. And I think it's like February. It's February 9th of 2025 will be the exact day that I'm the same age my dad was when he died. So he was so young. And from that happening, I was like, well, shit, life is so short. I am just going to go do everything that I want to do. Everything that I want to do in life, because I'm going to blink and it's going to be over. I'll be like this and it'll be 30. I'll be like this and it'll be 40. I'll be like this and it'll be like 50. And I just had that awareness really early. My dad gave me the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying when he was dying. And I stumbled across the book, The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukov. And I'll tell that whole story of how I ended up forming Zoko Inc. and going on the Oprah Winfrey Show with Gary. Because one of my businesses was doing subscription-based websites for best-selling spiritual authors. I cannot recommend, actually, The Heart of the Soul, his book with Linda Francis. I cannot recommend it more. And I digress. And that is a different part of the story. Right now, we're going to talk about The Apprentice. So I hit life with this attitude very quickly after my dad died. Oh, and we're drinking wine. So let's just take a little sip together. Is it Friday? We're going to try and release this on Friday night, so you should maybe go get a glass of wine too. If you drink, if you're sober, that's awesome too. So I start building these companies. But I know that I did mention when I was 12 that my dad had given me a book. He actually gave me 2 books. I might have been 11. The Art of the Deal by Tony Robbins. No, I'm sorry. Awakening the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. And when he handed me that book when I was 11 or 12, he handed it to me and said, Andrea, this is what it means to be successful in America. I got to tell Donald Trump that story. I told him that at the season finale of The Apprentice. And he was like, what? Why didn't you tell me that while you were on the show? Would have been good for the cameras, but I didn't. I told him after the show. And so as I'm hitting it really hard and starting these companies, like my dad was proud of me when I started Rhythm Sticks. He was beaming with pride when I was like 18 or 19 years old and had made $70,000 a year. Because he asked me, he set me up with a CPA that he knew, and he was like, Andrea, you made $70,000 this year? I was like, yeah, is that good? I didn't know. I didn't have any concept of money, really. And this was back when my first job was at McDonald's. This was back when you could work at McDonald's and literally afford an apartment by yourself without roommates. I only worked that job for like 3 weeks when I was 16, but it was or 15 and a half, actually. It was my first job. And when I moved out, I had Rhythm Sticks, and I also like delivered pizza still at night because the tips were they were so good. And everything was so inexpensive. I saw Beck play for $6. I had tickets to the last Lollapalooza where Nirvana was supposed to play, and it was $27. Like, everybody could afford to go do everything. Let's bring that America back. Again, we need a whole different third-party system for that, but that is a story for another time. So I digress. This is what the episodes where I drink wine look like. And so I keep deleting them. And now we're going to see how you guys like it, because I'll just be off in the weeds. But I have notes, which will bring me back. So I'm hitting it hard, and I am very quickly making a lot of money. So I made my first $1 million when I was like 24. Then I lost money. Like a year and a half later, I lost everything when I was 25. So it was a very quick trajectory. And then it took a few years to make it back. I think I was like 28 when I really started doing really fucking crazy well again. And it took 3 years to turn everything around. And I had no idea what I was doing. And we will unfold that story at another time of how do you win when you don't even know how to win, and how do you learn from your mistakes and all that stuff. So fast forward to when I was about 28 or 29 and I really start to do well. I have this mentor who has chosen every person that's been on Survivor and Apprentice and Amazing Race. How did I get that mentor? Well, my dad died, and I did not deal with it. And I was like 25, and I had made my first $1 million already, and I had lost it. And if you want to hear the story of how that happened, it's on the previous episode. And I was like, what the fuck? Now I have to climb this whole fucking mountain again. Are you kidding me right now? And I was so angry with myself. And the way that I talk to myself, I would not talk to my worst enemy that way. I don't have enemies, but I wouldn't talk to anyone the way that I was talking to myself in my mind. I really wouldn't. It was an unkind place to live, the privacy of my own mind. And I was 25 and I started having anxiety attacks. I started having panic attacks. And I had just lost everything. I just lost my dad and had never been to his grave. And I knew that I had to figure something out because I had this 4-day-long panic attack. And I always had an aversion to unnecessary medication. Necessary medication, all of the yes. Unnecessary medication, all of the no. But I was so at my rope's end that I went to a doctor and got whatever it was. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't Valium, but it was something to take the edge off of this panic attack after 4 days of trying to get out of it. And whatever it was, I had a very bad, severe allergic reaction to. We'll call it Valium for the sake of ease, even though it was something else. And it wasn't like a long-term type of a drug that you would take. It was like a short-term, just like muscle relaxer, knock you out, take your anxiety away, whatever drug that was back in the 90s. And the reaction was violent. I was shivering. I broke out in hives. I had to go to the urgent care. And so it was not even an option for me to take something like that. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to therapy. I hear that's good. And now all of a sudden I went from like having $1 million cash positive to spending that on the expansion of the company and having like whatever, a lot, $300,000 or $400,000 left. And then that all got wiped out by Mr. Rags going out of business when they owed me so much money, and by the Hot Topic declining to keep that Aussie order and me not knowing how to negotiate something with the other company that had the rights on it. So I'm just a fucking mess. But to the outside world, I look so put together, and I'm just super not. And there's no internet, not really. This is like 2000. So there wasn't like community, or 2001, there's not like community on the internet. So I call some of my friends, some of my local friends in San Diego, and one of them knows a psychiatrist. Who is the psychiatrist that vetted everyone who ever was on Survivor or Apprentice or Amazing Race? And like the first season of Survivor had just come out, and it was a phenomenon. So this friend of mine gives me an introduction to this doctor, Dr. Richard Levac. Well, he's full. He's not taking new clients. And I was like, shit. So I find a referral to somewhere else, to somebody else. He's not a psychiatrist, he's a psychologist, and he did come highly recommended to me through people. So I went to go there, and he wanted to put me on, I think it was Zoloft, or I don't remember what it was, but it was a really gnarly, to me when I read it, it was a gnarly drug. It wasn't Zoloft, it was something more gnarly. Lithium? Oh, I think it was lithium. It was something gnarly. And whatever it was, I just was like, okay, first of all, I had a super bad reaction to like Valium or whatever the first drug was, which was not it was not a drug that people usually have allergic reactions to. And also, my dad did just die, and like I haven't been to the cemetery. I can't go. I haven't really cried. I didn't cry at my dad's funeral. Like I haven't accessed the loss of that in some way. I don't even know if I know how. And I just lost everything after making my first $1 million when I was 23 or 24. I actually have real actual things happening that are creating the emotions that I'm having. I don't think that this is something that I need a drug for. I think I need to figure out how to deal with my emotions because I want to create these huge companies, and I need to figure out how to regulate my responses to stuff. And this psychiatrist in La Jolla looked at me, very expensive, $450 an hour, and I don't have money. And that would be like $1,000 or $1,200 today. And he said, well, if you don't want to take this prescription for lithium, I don't know how serious about your mental health that you are. And I was like, so I feel like you should fuck all the way off. And it do. So then I was so lucky that I had that allergic reaction, and I was so lucky that I knew that I didn't want to go down that path. And I was so lucky that I truly believed that I didn't need it, because this was an unnecessary recommendation. We will get verification from that, from what happens next. And at the same time, I'm not trying to talk one single thing. I think anything that anybody finds helpful through a situation of social anxiety or through depression or any mental health thing that I certainly was dealing with at the moment, that any way that anybody is finding a graceful way through that, that works for them. I think that's wonderful. It was not the right solution for me. And the forcefulness with which he wanted me to take a pill instead of dealing with the underlying issues was all of the no. And so I called Richard Levac's office, and he had this line, this separate line at the time, a long time ago, where you could leave a private message for him. And I left him this private message that told him what happened and was like, look, I'm on this precipice point and I know that I can heal this. And like, I meditate a lot and I don't know what's happening here. And I need help, and you've become so highly recommended. And I know that you're not taking new clients. I know that you're not, but will you please meet with me, please? And he said, yes. He had his office call me back and he said, yes, it's however much it was an hour. It's expensive also. And I said, oh, I will go. Like, thank you. And it was stressful to me to agree to go do something that was, I think his was less at the time. It was like whatever, $275 an hour, which today would be so much, $800, like so much more. I didn't have a lot of cash because I just lost all this stuff. But I was like, whatever. I mean, it might even have been $400 also. I don't remember. And I go to Richard's office and I go up to the session, and this guy is the most handsome, fabulous, soothing, authentic, connected presence of a human being that I have ever met. He is so good. He's so connected, and he's British, and he talks really slow, and he has this 1,000-watt smile, and he's super tan, and he's got this fabulous silver hair, and he's a surfer. And he's like, Andrea. So he sees I'm going to do the worst imitation of him. It's the most ridiculous thing because he has the most fabulous voice, and I am not good at accents. Maybe sometimes I think that I am. The more wine I have, the more I think that. Then I'll listen back and be like, no, girl, no, you do not have that talent. You just don't. But so I go and I'm talking to him, and he's like, Andrea, you actually have real problems, darling. You're not diagnosable. I'm really sorry that this guy told you to take that medication. And then I'll just talk in a normal voice with the rest of what he said, because that's the worst accent in this history of ever. And then he said, you actually really did just lose everything. You actually really just did lose your dad. You lost all this money. You're hemorrhaging cash. And I kept having these mentors. And when I tell you I had many mentors, I had many mentors, and all of them were men. And because there weren't a lot of women that had done the same things that I did. And there were plenty. There were like maybe 7, 8, 10% of the people that were where I wanted to be, were at the $100 million business level, were women, but I didn't know any of them. And I had easier access to a bunch of men who had started, $100 million, $200 million, billion-dollar companies. I would meet them through different business groups that I was getting in, and through different, just like outreach. It was actually before business groups. It was through different outreach to different people that I would like read an article about on Entrepreneur Magazine and reach out to them. And inevitably, for the listeners who are watching on YouTube, I'm holding up a magazine cover. This is what it looked like when I was 32. And I always had the perfect hair, and I always had the perfect makeup. And I was a professional fire dancer and a yoga chick. So I have really good posture still to this day. And I always wore really tall boots and really tall heels when I was younger, before all the hiking gave me a few problems with my feet, so I don't wear those as much anymore. So I would walk into the room as like this 6'2" sort of goddess looking woman, always perfectly dressed, perfectly coiffed. And inevitably, these men would explain to me that it would be very nice if they and I could have some private time together. And they would say this in some different way of courting. And uniformly, they all were married. And I always would decline. And I would say something very charming and very clever in response. Something to the effect of like, I am uncertain what it is about anything that I have done that would make you think that for 1 minute I would put myself in the second position in any relationship. I'm a monogamous kind of gal. And you have just given me a very lot of information. You have told me that you will cheat on your partner. So this is probably not an ideal setting from which a relationship is going to be formed. And then for the most part, they would just leave it at that. And Richard said to me, you don't need a therapist right now. You actually have actual problems. And what you actually need is a mentor. And so in the interim of you finding a proper business mentor, an actual business mentor, who is not going to just want to be dating you, I will be your mentor, because he had a very, very huge business background in addition to having a private practice and also consulting on all of these entertainment ventures. He's just a business guy and he knew a lot about entrepreneurship. And he said, I want you to find a mentor who has started like $100 million, $200 million, $1 billion company. And in the meantime, I will take your calls. You will come and meet with me ever so often, and I will not charge you for that because you don't have any money to pay me right now anyway, and you're not diagnosable. And the thing about Richard is he was so in demand. He had his pick of the litter of clients, and he really wanted to help people who were diagnosable, who did need really a lot of mental health care. And I just fell into the category of someone who was facing this life circumstance. And he was like, I'm pretty sure you're going to get through this. You just need to do this and this and this. You need to learn how to trust people. You don't trust anyone. And I was like, true, facts. And you need to X, Y, Z. And he told me a few things. And we left it at that. And then every now and again, he always would take my calls for free. And then I started to really turn around the company. And I was like, well, I actually want to do therapy with you if you will take me as an actual client, and I will sit with you and pay you much later, like a couple years after when I had my feet back under me, and did a little therapy here and there over the years. But in general, he was just like, you're really self-reflective. You just need a little bit of course correction, maybe find a great coach. Like, you're really doing fine and you're open to feedback. And that was my experience of what he said to me. And he did this one thing. Before he told me he would mentor me, he just said, you're not diagnosable. I will take you on in some way, maybe as a mentor. Go take this series of tests. And he gave me a test called the MMPI, which is one of the leading experts in the world at the results of that test, at decoding the results of that test. And then I came back in and he said, oh, that's what I thought. And I said, what? And he's like, and he gave me so many other tests. He gave me like 6 or 8 hours of psychological tests to go take. He said, that's what I thought. You actually have this personality type. It's like a survivor type of personality. And you could go through anything and make it out on the other side. So you have all of this level of ability to get through situations by compartmentalizing like different scenarios that you don't want to think about right now and focusing in on what you really want. And that's actually a personality type on the MMPI. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Good to know. And it was because of that he would take me as a client. And that comes in as important a year or two later. So he was casting season 2 or 3 of Survivor. I think it was season 2. And that was a big enough TV show. I think, or it might have been season 3. I don't remember. That was a big enough TV show where it had broken through like the zeitgeist of public conversation. And I had heard about it. So the degree of which a TV show had to be big for me to hear that it was on television was a lot. So then we ended up having, like, for the first season of Survivor, it was so popular. Then we ended up having potlucks at all my friends' houses, and I watched Survivor despite the fact that I didn't have a television, because we'd all go and watch it together as an event on Thursday nights. And he called me before one of the early seasons of Survivor, I think it was season 3, and said, hey, somebody that is like your age with a similar background to you has very last minute dropped out. And we have a lot of like secondary people that could potentially come and take this position, but you would be perfect for this and you have the right personality type. And like, I already know that because I've already run all these tests, which people do have to go through the psychological vetting to be on a show like that, to make sure that they can handle whatever might come from being on a show like that. And I was so busy in my companies, and it was right when I still was at a loss rate. And I had seen the first season, and I was like, Richard, they had to eat rats on that show. They had to eat rats. No, I am good. There are easier ways to make $1 million. I will do not that. And he was like, no. they fixed that. Like they fixed that. And then there were some issues with season 2 where people got like very sick. Like they fixed that, come and do whatever the season it was. And I was like, I'm good. And still remember, I hadn't gotten over all the social anxiety. I did eventually get over that. I will talk about that at some point because it was a whole process that I went through where I really just have not had a panic attack again since I was like 29. But I had them for like 3 or 4 years and they were terrible, terrible, terrible. So at 29, I get over the panic attacks. So this whole process that I will talk about maybe at some point, it would be a whole episode. Maybe I'll do that with Nick Pigeon, who's a positive psychologist. So anyhow, fast forwarding, Richard calls me and says, hey, The Apprentice is coming out. And I was like, what is that? Because that was a show with Donald Trump. And like you go and do some tasks and then whoever wins gets to be the CEO of one of the commercial construction projects that he has. And I was like, oh, I thought he just licensed his name because I know people's business model. So I'm like, oh, I didn't think he had any construction projects. I thought he just licensed out his name. And he said, yeah, well, yes, he mostly maybe does that. I don't know, but it's some CEO of some Trump building. And I was like, okay, cool. I would love to do that because it sounds like I would get a PhD in commercial construction in exchange for the use of my mind for 1 year. And that is no small trade. And so I said, that sounds really fun. What do I have to do? And he said, you have to be sequestered. And at the time, it was like 55 days. It was so long, maybe 45 days. It was such a long period of time. When I did it, it was 42 days. But it was longer, I think, on season 1. And I was like, I cannot. What? I had just started getting sales again. I had just started getting sales again in my company. So my company right now, at that point, was doing like $4 or $6 or $10 million in annual revenue. I'm like, I cannot be offline. Because he's like, oh yeah, you can't have a cell phone, you can't have access to the computer, you can't do anything for like 55 days. And I was like, that is not a possible thing. I do not have a proper team in place that would be able to do that at that time. At that time, I did not. And I was like, I can't not talk to my team even if I do have a proper team in place. Like, what? How are you going to get any entrepreneurs? Because remember, I misunderstood and I thought it was all entrepreneurs on that show. I thought that's all it was because I didn't own a television. Who applies to go on a television show that they have never seen an episode of? Only me. Only me. When I told Caroline that, she was like, 2 years later, she was like, girl, I remember when you told me that. I thought you were lying. And I was like, no television. Didn't see the show. So, and you couldn't just like go on Hulu and watch past episodes back then. That was not a thing. So I'm like, I can literally not leave my companies for 50 or 55 days or however much the first season required, no matter what. And so then the second season comes around and nobody knows this part of the story. I don't believe I ever have told this part of the story because I'm like, this is kind of boring, but whatever. But it does come in as important later. Wow, we're not even going to get to where the first episode airs on this particular episode. This is the backstory to being on The Apprentice and then also to who it made me as a person going through all the steps along the way. I go to interview for season 2. But I was like, I just want to interview. I'm not even going to tell Richard that I'm interviewing. I'm just going to go to one of their like city things. I think I bumped myself up in some way. I think I like made some little fucking video cassette of VHS tape and like sent it to them. And I got invited to go to like whatever city it was. It was not where I lived, but I was going to be traveling. It might have been like Atlanta or somewhere I absolutely didn't live. But I was going to be traveling from there and going up to Manhattan for like a week. And I had never been to New York before. I was like 31. And then I was flying to Europe and doing a solo road trip around Europe for like 6 weeks. And I had been planning this forever. And I had never been to Europe before. It was so much harder to travel, 20 years ago than it is now. So along the trajectory of this trip, I just planned myself to be able to go to an in-person casting because they reached out to me after they saw my VHS tape and they're like, yes, please come to an in-person casting for season 2 of The Apprentice. And then I go. And remember, I did not tell Richard that I was going to get any advice in any way. I just went. And I'm in the casting, and they're clearly like, who the fuck is this chick? This is cool. This is amazing. So then at the end of the casting, these assistant producers who don't have any pull, like an assistant first vetting producer, that's like your first pass at the first city casting. That is not the person who has the pull to make a whole recasting decision based on something. I don't understand any of this. I go in, and I know they're going to want me on the show because I'm kind of amazing. And a chick who is like 32, who's had multiple multi-million-dollar companies by 32, that is exactly who a TV show is looking for. At that time, that was not common. There might have been 400 or 500 of us in the whole country. And you don't need to do a TV show. Then maybe there was 4,000. There was such a small thing percentage-wise of women who had that level of success that early in life in that generation. Thank God that's changed. Like all of the fucking yes to that being different now, but that's how that was then. It was not common. And I knew that it wasn't common, and so I knew that they would want me to do the show if I would agree to do the show. It always felt like it was just within my desire to do it, especially because Richard also called me and asked me if I wanted to be on The Amazing Race, because I had just broken up with a long-term boyfriend who I dated for multiple years, who's a fantastic, wonderful, fantastic human being. And a couple that was going to be on The Amazing Race, who was a recently broken up couple, had dropped out at the last minute. Do you want to come take their place? You would have to leave in 3 or 4 days. You have your passport, right? He just called me and asked me. And I was like, no. My ex and I like each other. We're friends. We will not be friends if we do a race around the world together. There was a reason we broke up. This would not end well for either one of us. And I did call him because we're such good friends. Even after the breakup, we were good friends. And he was like, yeah, we're not going to be friends if we do that. And I was like, cool, yeah, it would be such a fun life experience, but like, thank you, no. And we would have had to leave in 3 days, and that was, again, not a thing that was possible. So by the second season, I was like, okay, I think I can sort this out to where I actually could leave and go and film the show. So I go and interview for the show, and it was Atlanta, I'm almost positive. And these like assistant producers are asking me all the questions, and they're like, well, this is all of the yes. And then they say, well, you're going to have to go to finals, like whenever, in LA, like in 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, no, I'll be in Europe on a road trip. They're like, wait, but you can't come to the final thing to whether or not you'll be on this TV show. And I'm like, no, I'm just not going to like fucking cut my trip to Europe short. Like, are you insane? Because I didn't understand the power of being on television to what it could do for a business. And again, this is early days, and life always happens the way it's supposed to. And so I did not get a call back because I very straightforwardly told them, like, I cannot come to the final casting. I won't. But if you want to put me on the show, like, I'll come on the show. When does the show air? And they're like, that is super not how that works. And I wasn't in the room with the right person who would have been like, oh, well, sure. And then even beyond that nobody probably could have said, oh, well, then sure. Because a show like that, like a competition reality show that has a big financial cash prize, they actually have to follow gaming laws for whatever the rules are for a game show where there is a contest where someone will win a prize. There's actually legal ramifications, and you actually have to follow a particular process, or else it will be considered not legal. Or they could open themselves up to a liability of potentially getting sued if somebody gets something somewhere. And so that's why a production company would be concerned. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I went and I did the interview, and I didn't get called back. I've later found out it was because I said I couldn't go to the finals. And they asked me if I would fly back from Europe for it, and I was like, no, I'm good. Nope, rented a car. I am driving around the countryside of Tuscany and of Switzerland, and it was beautiful. It's one of the best trips of my life. And so I came back, and I didn't think about The Apprentice again at all, ever, because I didn't really feel like there was a period of time where I could leave for 45 days. I get a call a couple years later from Richard, and he says, I actually don't do casting for The Apprentice anymore, but season 5 is about to start. It's about to get casted, and I'm not on the casting team, but you should be on the show because it's the last season that this show is going to air most likely. It was like sort of widely known. So like the ratings are down, and they know that, and this is probably going to be the last episode of the show. This is what I had heard. And will you come and apply to be on the show? And I said, do you know, I actually think that I can leave. How long do I have to leave for? Oh, it's 42 days. And I said, okay, well, here's the thing though. I'm doing over 10 million in annual revenue right now. I literally cannot leave for that amount of time if I can't talk to my employees. Now, if I can talk to my employees, I can go, but I have to be able to communicate with them. I have to be able to know when orders are coming in. I have to confirm the orders that are coming in from all my chain stores. I have to communicate to anyone who's having an issue with getting any of the merchandise to a particular place. Like, my staff is fine, but I do not have a well-oiled machine. And I didn't know how to have a well-oiled machine at that point of being an entrepreneur. And they said yes. They said, we will make sure that you have access to the internet. So they actually allowed everyone to have some very limited access to the internet on that season because I required it. But they also gave me access to actually call my offices. I didn't know if other people had access to that. And they would hand deliver me printed out purchase orders that I was receiving from all these different chain stores, because once I got a purchase order, I had to verify it and have communication with the buyer. And I remember one day when I actually was on the Apprentice, I had $500,000 worth of sales that day while I was just like filming a TV show. And I didn't realize how fucking insane that was. That means I made $350,000 in my pocket that day. I didn't understand. I thought everyone that was like on that show was going to be in that situation where they just have companies that are making millions of dollars. Like, isn't that what this show is? I just didn't understand that. No, they take somebody who's like a real estate agent, which is an entrepreneur, and someone that does another business owner, like owned a construction company, but then it has to get like a lawyer from here and a lawyer from there, and someone that works for a big corporation from here and someone that works from a big corporation from there. And they just put together a whole bunch of different people and see who's going to get this. And I didn't understand actually that was the premise of the show because I was busy. So I didn't even really look into it because it always just seemed like a thing that it was in my choice to do or not. And I was like, oh yeah, that probably would be really good for my companies to be on national TV. There were no influencers. I keep thinking of cutting bangs, and every time I have to look at myself, I'm like, maybe I will, but then I'm afraid I'll regret them. That's what the wine episode brings, because that's why I keep touching my hair when I go like this. I'm like, do I do the bangs? I don't know. Maybe I'll get clip-ins and you guys can help me decide. So I agree. And somehow, some way, I get put forward. I don't remember the details because so many things happened and I was so fucking busy. I was the CEO of a $10 million company at the time for delinquent distribution and the CEO of a $4 million company at the time for Sticker Junkie. And I was spinning up like 2 side projects at the time. So I didn't like really read the fine print on anything. I had 0 extra minutes in a day. And I did not drink wine and I did not smoke weed. All that I did was work from morning till night every day. And I lived in the middle of nowhere. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was a choice. Why? That's so weird. And I love Santa Fe, don't get me wrong, but it's a weird choice for someone who's 31 and single and at the top of her career game. All of my neighbors were in their 60s plus in my community. I was the youngest homeowner in my community by 30 years. It was a weird choice. So I was living in Santa Fe and I had re-domiciled my companies to there. I almost moved them to Boulder. That would have been such a better decision. But like when I went to Santa Fe, it was bright and sunny and beautiful. And when I went to Boulder, it was slushy and grimy and snowing. I literally just went to Boulder for the first time on the wrong day, on the wrong week. And it was miserable all week. I've lived part-time in Boulder for a long time. It makes me sad to this day that I didn't move there when I was in my 30s, because it is my favorite town in the country. Having driven all of the scenic highways west of the Mississippi and a whole lot of them east of the Mississippi, I've actually seen most cool towns in this country, and Boulder is my favorite. So anyhow, I digress. The Apprentice. So I somehow get pushed forward, and I do not remember if I had to like submit something for that. I know I had to do like a video, like another new VHS video, because it was very cute and very charming. I rewatched it after I filmed it, and I think I still have the VHS somewhere. where I walk people through my beautiful house in Santa Fe, my beautiful office space in Santa Fe, and say, this is me, and I get to go. I believe I got to go straight to the finals. And so then I still had to go through their whole entire vetting process because legally you have to. So I went to this hotel. All right, we're going to wrap this soon. Dang, yeah, the first episode is just going to end right where I actually got accepted on The Apprentice. This is going to be long too because there's a whole other couple stories right here. So I get to go to the final, like, we're going to decide if you're on The Apprentice or not. And it's at this hotel that I later ended up speaking in a lot with the Learning Annex. I don't remember what it is. It's like in Santa Monica. And there's handlers everywhere. So there's like the top 50 contestants, and they're going to get whittled down to the 16 or 18 people that like actually get on the show. And you have these handlers to make sure that you don't talk to anybody else because they don't want people to strategize in advance or to have like a relationship with each other, a pre-existing relationship with each other that people that are watching the show won't understand. They don't want you having any inside jokes. They don't want you to have any inside knowledge about who people are. It makes for better television. That's all really understandable. This is how it was done back then. So you have every test you can imagine. You have physical tests, health tests, stress tests, all kinds of disease tests, and then you also have a bunch of psychological evaluations to make sure that if you get a really bad edit, that you're not the type of person that's going to self-harm. If you really, that you're not going to blow up on your fellow contestants in a way that would be hurtful. And so they're running everybody through all of these different tests and IQ tests through the whole week. And during this week, I have shown up and I don't have a skirt. I don't have a dress because I don't dress that way. I only have like really nice jeans and really nice tops. So if we refer back to one of the magazines that I'm on the cover of, I'm wearing fabulous black jeans and brown boots in this picture. I'm showing it on YouTube. And a Johnny Was shirt. Johnny Was used to customize shirts for me after I was on The Apprentice. Thanks, babes. Because I've always loved their stuff. And I always looked fantastic and very well put together, but it was never formal. I lived in the Southwest, so I had the most amazing like turquoise jewelry and the most amazing well put together outfits, but they were not like skirts or dresses or whatever. So my handlers come in because they're like, you have such a good shot at this. And I'm like, they're lucky that I'm here. And they're like, you're not ever supposed to leave, but we'll let you go to this mall in Santa Monica, the big one, the promenade that's close by. Go get a different outfit that's more businessy. You have to wear a skirt or a dress. And I, for reasons of my own, never wore skirts and dresses because I just wasn't comfortable in them. I just wasn't. So I went and I got this business outfit, and it was like really cute brown pants and a really cute pink top. And they were like, we literally just told you to get a dress. You're not going to get casted. He won't cast a woman who wears pants. And I was like, well, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. I go into my interviews, and the first interview is with Jay Beanstalk and Mark Burnett. And Jay is like an executive producer on the show, and Mark Burnett, of course, is the creator of the show and the main producer of the show. And I have heard things because I talk to people and they talk to me back, and I listen to what they're saying, no matter who they are. So I listened to the assistant producers when I was talking to them when I was in the trials for season 2. And then I listened very closely to all of the handlers who were all assistant producers or like junior executive producers. And I would ask them questions and they would answer. And I was like a crazy person in there because I had never seen the show, and I was just being myself and answering everything super honestly. And you would keep getting put in, we would keep getting put into like these group interviews, and I always stood out as like, who the fuck is this chick? And then we could all work out at different points in time. It was like a timed, like you go work out from this time to this time, and I was a fucking yogi. Before that was a thing. I started doing Bikram yoga when I was 23, and one of my girlfriends was getting her yoga certification. And back then you had to do 10,000 hours. So I would practice yoga with her in her studio that her husband, who owns Seedless Clothing, Kate, rest in peace, was my first yoga instructor. And her husband, who is a business partner of mine, Shay McAdams from Seedless Clothing, built her a yoga studio. And I would do like 3 hours, 3 or 4 times a week with her. So she would get her hours. And so as she was prepping to do her Bikram yoga certification in India, as one does back then, I would do the whole course of yoga with her. It's like when you're holding Warrior 1 or Warrior 2 or Warrior 3 for all my fellow yogis, you would have to hold that for 7 minutes on each side. On each side. To become a yogi back then. What the actual fuck? Could I do that? No, I obviously could not do that. You'd have to hold plank for 7 minutes. What? And then you'd have to do like all of the different chaturangas for, it was ridiculous. It was such advanced training. The yoga instructors, and back in the day, and now when you're like, oh, yoga instructors train for 20 or 30 hours, you're like, that is not a thing. That is not how yoga used to be taught. And so I would do hours and hours and hours of yoga with her, and I maybe got up to like 3 or 4 minutes on each pose where she was getting to 7. But I would train. I didn't drink alcohol or smoke weed or anything. So after whatever work day I had, I would go like train yoga for hours with her. So when we would go work out, I would do like a full yoga flow, but like watching a professional yogi do yoga was what it used to be like back in the day, but it's been so long. For me to really, really do yoga. And my form was perfect because she would correct me constantly because she was getting her training on how to actually correct somebody to do the perfect flows. So we would get in the silent room where we couldn't talk to each other, and all of a sudden I would be doing the most ridiculous yoga poses, which people were not used to yet. Looking like a smoking hot hottie. And also the food was terrible, like disgusting that they were providing for us. And as is thoroughly canvassed in previous episodes, girl, I'm a foodie. And so there was the first early day, like before DoorDash existed. There was the first like gourmet, we will deliver you stuff from a restaurant services. They don't exist anymore. So in LA, I would order in the most amazing food, and I was rich as fuck. So if I was going to get Indian food, I was going to get like all my different favorite Indian foods. So I could have a little bit of each, and then there'd be some in the fridge and like whatever, but I would order a feast. So then I would tell all of the assistant producers and all of the executive producers, like, hey, you're my homies right now. I don't have anybody else. And I just don't want saag paneer. I want like everything. I'm a girl who likes all of the things. So I want my roti, and I want some naan, and I want the saag paneer, and I want the mali kofta, and I want all of the different dishes that I want. And I was vegetarian, of course. So I'm like, why don't you come over, and dal and everything, like, why don't you come over and then we'll have a feast. And then any leftovers you can take, because I'm going to order something different from like an Ethiopian place tomorrow and a Thai place the next day and an Italian place the day after that, because I didn't live in LA. So I finally got to try all these amazing LA restaurants that I always wanted to try, but I just didn't live there at the time. And so the assistant producers and like junior executive producers would come and eat in my hotel room and take the excess food away. Because what was I going to do with it? I didn't have a microwave in there, or I didn't even use the microwave. I've never owned a microwave because I do not want to put microwaves through my food. I will cook them on fire, or worst case scenario, in an oven. I'm having these lovely nighttime chats with all my homies that are on the crew of The Apprentice. And they're like, who the fuck is this chick? And I'm like, I know, it's crazy. So they let me leave, but I have all kinds of inside knowledge of like the right things to say, the right ways to respond by the time that I'm meeting with the people. And so I go meet with Mark Barnett and Jay Beanstalk. And the executive producers are tight-lipped, or the junior executive producers, he says, they're not telling me much. But I'm picking up some things, some little things, some tiny things, like Mark fucks with people, which I already had heard. So I'll just mess with people just to see what their response is. And I'm like, clearly the dude that is plying people with alcohol when they've had 2 to 4 hours of sleep kind of likes to just stress test them in ways. It makes great television. Says to me in this one-on-one interview that I have with him and Jay Beanstalk, well, you know, we've talked to all of your friends. And I said, yes, I know. And he said, well, they told us that you are really lonely and you live up on this mountain in the middle of nowhere in Santa Fe, and you have like 20 acres, but you're just like almost cripplingly lonely. And you really hope that being on this show will help you to reach out in some way to where you feel like you have connection. And the level that hit my heart And I felt seen and also betrayed if somebody had actually said that about me, because that felt like a very vulnerable, very deep, very gnarly assessment. Somebody just to say to me, look at me straight in the eyes. And he was not an unattractive man at that age. And I was like fighting back tears because he was like speaking so deeply to, I was really lonely and I did live in the middle of nowhere and I never trusted people. And that is why I was single. And he's like, that's why you're single, because you just don't trust anyone. And I'm like, oh, fuck all the way off, you fucking asshole. In my mind, a little. And I was fighting back tears. And I said, no, they did not. No, they did not. He said, what? He said, Kristen, this friend of mine, I'm really good friends with a woman named Kristen today. I was really good friends with a different woman named Kristen back then. He said, who is a wonderful person, both of them are. He said, no, Kristen told us that. And I said, no, she did not. No, she didn't. And I'm fighting back tears. He's clearly right. And so he's like giving me that, if you watch the 48 Laws of Power, he's giving me that like silence, and nobody can beat me in that silence. If somebody can try and hold the silence with me as a strategy, and I know it seems like, because I can talk into the camera for an hour and a half, that I would just start talking, but I will not. I will always win that, always win that, always. And in this particular circumstance, I knew that I could win the competition he was trying to have with me. I knew it. But instead, I was like, well, it's going to be more impactful, just to be honest. And I said, well, you're not wrong. And you know you almost made me cry. But you're completely fucking full of shit. Because no one in my life would be that disloyal to me. No one, and especially not her. She would absolutely not have told one of your lackeys who called her on the phone that I was deeply lonely. Of course I am. I live on 20 acres in the middle of New Mexico, in the middle of nowhere. How would I not be? And have I never trusted any people? They've given me a whole lot of reasons not to. But my friend did not tell you that. She didn't. She wouldn't have. And he lost it. He laughed so hard. And he did not try and fuck with me anymore. Except for I thought he did, but what he was telling me the next time was the truth. So then Jay Beanstalk, he steps in. He's an executive producer on the show, and he asked me a question. And I said, well, I don't know, because I tried out for season 2 of this show. And I did not get it. And Jay slammed his hands on his knees and went, what? And halfway, like, sat up out of his chair. He was like, are you fucking kidding me? What is our vetting process where you slipped through the cracks? And I was like, I know. And I laughed. And I said, Jay, you just gave up your whole hand right there to me. So I know I'm in this show now. And you boys are lucky to have me. Or something like that. Some fucking cheeky ass thing. So then I leave and they tell me to get the right outfit. And I absolutely do not get the right outfit. And they're like, you're not going to get on the show because he's not going to take a woman in pants. Donald isn't. He's going to veto you. And I was like, okay, cool. And back then, for years and years and years, I had this first. I had platinum bleach blonde hair right here and like auburn hair or super dark brown or brown and red mix in the back. And platinum blonde in the front. It was very striking. But there had been a contestant in a previous season who had that style. And when I saw that on the cover of some magazine somewhere, and I was like, dude, that's mine. So anyway, when I applied for the show, they were like, you look too much like that other contestant. Mark Burnett said things. I will get to that in a second. So I go in and I have this like platinum blonde in the front and like red and brown in the back and brown pants and a pink top. And that's not the look that Donald Trump is going for. But I just won him over in that exchange. I was like, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done this. I don't remember what I said, but whatever I said worked. And then I got taken, and I went through all the other tests, and then I got taken up for the final thing. And there must have been 50 people in the room when there was the final, like, who got in and who didn't. And it was like the biggest suite at this hotel. And it was a huge front room. And there was all these people in a big U all the way around the room. Except for that, I already know I'm getting the show. And Mark Burnett and Jay, when I was in that thing, they said something like, I don't remember. They said something to indicate to me that I for sure was going to get it, which I already knew. And then they asked me about my relationship with Richard. And I told them very clearly, and he wasn't involved in the casting anymore. And then we, and how did I know him and this and that? But they're like, yeah, you're in, you've started up 7 companies and you're 32 and you are an attractive woman. And Mark is the one who actually got to tell people whether or not they got the show. So I walk in the room and Mark is sitting right in front of me and Donald Trump like is off to the left and Jay is off to the right and there's a million other people in the room. And I don't know if Donald was in the final thing. Anyways, whatever. I had met him by then. I think he probably was in there. I literally don't remember. And maybe he wasn't. And Mark says, well, Andrew, congratulations. You've got the show. And I had no response. I was like, uh-huh. No reaction. None. Because I knew I had it. How fucking lucky were they to have me there? How many women look like a fucking Victoria's Secret model that have started like so many companies and made millions of dollars? They were lucky I was going to be on the show. I wanted to make sure I'd actually be able to communicate with my staff. It was the only way I would actually do the show. This was not the negotiation was whether or not I was going to get the show. It was what I was going to need to get on the show because I didn't understand the power of television. I really, it sounds so fucking dumb, but I really didn't. I really didn't understand how much my sales would spike. I really didn't. Like, I knew that I had to prepare for it, but I did not know how good it would be. And I just knew that, like, of course, it's very few women have done what I did, of course, that I'm going to be on your show. So I have no response. So then he bursts out laughing and everyone is like, what the fuck is happening? And then he said, well, you're on this show because you can win this show. There's a lot of people that are going to be on this show for a lot of reasons. And a lot of people just make good television. And you're on this show because you can win this show. And I was like, of course I can. Obviously I can win this show. It's like a television game show. I'm pretty sure I've got this. And whatever I said, I think I just said like, yeah, of course I can. And everyone in the room just like burst out laughing because I'm sure other people like jumping up and down or having different emotions. And I was just like, yeah, you obviously won. And he goes, but you have this hairstyle, and a previous contestant had this hairstyle. You would look way better as a redhead. And I said, noted. That it? And he was like, yeah. So you're not going to get any sleep. I said, I think I asked if there was anything I had to prepare for because I hadn't seen the show. He's like, you hadn't seen the show? And I was like, I don't know television. I really haven't. And I know on Survivor they have like make fires or anything I need to prepare for, whatever. And he said, well, you're not going to get a lot of sleep. And I was like, okay. And he's like, no, you're going to get like 2 hours of sleep a night. And I was like, that's not possible. I thought he was fucking with me again because remember, he likes to fuck with people. So when he said that to me, I'm like, okay, sure I am. And that was true. I actually clocked my sleep the whole time I was on there and it literally averaged 2 hours a night. And they plied that sweet with alcohol. Whatever you asked for, you got, and a lot of people asked for alcohol, and I didn't drink it all back then. And so some of the insanity that I will tell you about as I unfold the story of being on The Apprentice in our Friday Storytime episodes are because of the volume of alcohol. That was in a suite with very attractive, very smart people who were on a competition business show. Things were said that people probably wish they didn't say, but like not having sleep and having a lot of alcohol will compound that. So that is where I will leave you. I thought this was going to be Secrets of the Apprentice, what happened on The Apprentice, but apparently that will be next week's episode. This is just Secrets of the Apprentice. How did I get in the door of saying, yes, I will do that show on The Apprentice? And Mark Burnett left me with that final comment of like, you should be a redhead. And then the next time I saw him, I was in the suite of The Apprentice. And I needed to like access the internet to do some check-in with my company in some way. And I, in fact, was a redhead. I did this hairstyle for the show. And he walked in and he just took a step back and he was like, whoa, I knew it. I knew you would look good as a redhead. And if you were to look up his wife, she and I are similar. Like, we could be cousins, we could be siblings. And she has that same like sort of Irish, English, European mutt background. I don't know what her background is, but kind of a similar look. Except for she had like beautiful, she's a beautiful woman. And I was like, I think that you just wanted to create more Irish looking women in the world. And he laughed and he was like, he was very appropriate. He was never inappropriate with me. He was like, you might be onto something. And I kept that red hair for years. It looked so good. And next time, on the next story time, I will tell you more about the unfolding story of what happened on The Apprentice. And I will eke out the business lessons that I learned from every part of the journey as we go. And when I watch back, I will watch with a keen eye as to whether or not I should drink wine. I didn't drink that much, obviously, but I did smoke a little weed. In the next episode, I'm actually going to tell the story of the whole thing, which is outlined in this book. And I will read you the passages of the book, and I will fill you in on the background story of what actually happened, the deeper dive version of what happened than what was captured in the 3.5 pages in Ramin Satuti's Apprentice in Wonderland. All right, guys, thanks for joining Andrea Lake 101. Again, if you're with me at this point, I'm looking for my first 1,000 fanatic fans. I'm looking for people that talk about this podcast the same way I talk about Morbid, or the same way I talk about Sakara, or any brand or any business that I love. So I can't wait until the day that I turn this on and 1,000 people have watched the most recent episode that I dropped. So you have no idea how much it helps if you like, if you follow, if you subscribe. Oh my God, please subscribe. It helps creators so much when you do that. And if you leave a comment, I will be reading the comments for the first 2 months after this podcast drops. It's September 27th, 2024. And I hope you join me for the whole ride, because I really believe, I truly know that I will hit my goal to go from 1.84 million in debt to 7 billion a billion cash positive in 7 years. So join me, comment, please follow me on Instagram at Andrea Lake 101. That also helps. And I will see you next time for the next edition of Storytime Secrets of The Apprentice, Part 2.